Hello and welcome to video number 5 in this series where I create a tracking plan for a tool that I often use by startups every day for 20 days. We are at 25%. It's quite significant. The interesting thing is I was a little bit concerned that the whole series at some point becomes really boring. I don't expect that anyone is watching the whole series, but if you do, please reach out to me and let me know, because I definitely want to hear if someone has the motivation to really go through all this. The interesting thing is, since I started out, I start to develop different kind of angles, how I look at the thing. And today we try also like a little bit tweaked angle. Today we were talking about Asana. I was using Asana on and off for quite a long time. I think I even used it pretty early on when it came out. I always liked their way, how they worked. I always liked their design. I definitely liked their usability. I think for me, one of the core features why I always went back to Asana, it's now also possible in other tools, was the possibility that you can treat tasks like a list, so like a document in a list. You can really write down all the tasks, hit enter, write the next task, and so on. You don't have to go for, create a new task, save, create a new task, save. It was really fast if you just want to churn down a couple of tasks that you have in your head. Interestingly, this stuck with me, so it's always like my positive feeling about Asana. The interesting take that we take today is, when you have watched other videos before in this series, so especially like the first one was Notion, and my emphasis in the Notion video was that we really have to focus on the core features, because if we don't do this, we basically go crazy. Notion is so vast and has so many different kind of aspects and features, and they're adding this stuff all the time, that if you want to go for the full picture, we would easily get lost in, let's say, in a very unfocused and unbalanced analytics setup. Therefore, in the Notion video, check it out, it's on my channel, I took a step back and said, okay, we're really focusing on the core features that makes Notion. Asana, as a task management tool, obviously has these core features too. But in this video, I want to take a slightly adapted approach, because task management is in the end not really hard to track. The core is pretty significant. What I was trying in the last 2 videos already was I want to incorporate the current direction or the current promise of the product, actually the strategy that the product has. The problem is, obviously, I have to derive the strategy or the product promise from the marketing material, and it might be different internally. There's sometimes a disconnect between what companies are communicating and what they're actually thinking internally. Sometimes just a matter of timing, because the product already is evolving in this direction, but the communication comes later because they want to reach a specific state. I want to try this here too. I want to see where Asana is going beyond the classic task management, because they have to, because like there are, I don't know, a gazillion task management tools out there, and a new one comes every week. Obviously, they have to build a different kind of profile. I want to take this into account when we create our analytics setup, because I strongly believe that an analytics setup has to be aligned with the business strategy, with the product strategy, and the, let's say, the main product promise that everything is now building around is the core center of a product strategy. And so I want to take this into account. It's an interesting experiment. I can already tell you it will be really interesting, because this time I generated everything beforehand. I have the possibility to show you a little bit more. I will walk you through all the things instead of doing it, let's say, on the go like I did in the first 2 videos. The first interesting thing is like, what is the major promise that we should look here into Asana? And so I'm not working at Asana. I don't even know someone working at Asana. Therefore, I can just guess. Usually my take, at least like yesterday already when I did the video about Vimcall, was Vimcall had their promise pretty obvious on the landing page. Here on the landing page, where we have where work connects. This obviously is the most generic marketing title that you can pick. I have no idea what that means. But the interesting thing is, at least we have a subline that tells us a little bit more. We are connect work to goals and automate workflows with AI as your teammate. We can pick up, and when you watch the video down here, which we will not do together, let's say there are two interesting aspects. First one is goals, the second one is workflows, and then we have AI. But I tend to not ignore AI, but let's say put it a little bit on the sideline. But for me, the interesting thing is like connecting goals and automate workflows. The interesting thing is like when you have a task management system, it works by itself. Like in data, it works even better when you can connect it with some goals, because then you can actually see, okay, we want to achieve that, and actually this is the work that we do for this. It's the same with data. So if we want to increase conversions, first of all, these are the different kind of tasks that we do to this, and then these are the kind of metrics that are leading to more conversions. Everything is aligned, everything goes in the right kind of direction. This is something which I really like, and it's an interesting aspect. Let's say we have the core features of a task management product, but beyond we say, okay, we have also goals, and now we also have workflows, because the workflows help us in the initiatives and projects that are leading to these goals to reduce the overhead in project management. I myself, for example, when I'm using Asana, which right now I don't do, I usually just use Asana when I work with multiple people on a project, because then obviously it shines. When I work with myself, I don't really need it. But when I work with multiple people on a project, workflows is one of the first things that I set up, because we often really end up with specific work that has structure and steps that are always coming back. For example, when I was working on a bigger content project, so we used Asana and we had a workflow for video production. And it worked really well. For each step, we had aligned which kind of task has to be done, and we did the assignment automatically. You move the video from step to step, and all the things are just happening automatically. And as someone who really loves automation, this really makes me happy. Today, in the analytics and the tracking plan setup, I want to focus how we can connect goals and workflows with the core features of a task management tool. We are doing this in the same videos. We will use my book, which you can find here. So you can also find it here on my website, the Analytics Implementation Workbook, which covers a lot about event data design, how to actually build a tracking plan that really gives you insights how your product is performing, how your customer journeys are performing, and not so much where people actually click. We track this too, but this is a side thing. It's not really at the center, because in the end, if someone clicks a specific icon, doesn't really help us to figure out if something is successful or not. You can buy the book, you get a PDF, and you also get a mini PDF. This is a reduced version, which you could also read, but it's not really intent for reading. The intention of the mini version is when you buy the book, you can put it into any kind of Gen AI model, and then you can create a tracking plan with it. And I'm using it because I can automate my first version of a tracking plan, and I can spend more time brainstorming, iterating on this. For me, this is a big helper to do this, and so it will definitely now become a part of my usual flow. I don't see it yet to produce anything which is final, and I think this is totally fine. When I work on tracking plan or analytics setups, I work in iterations, and I want to have at least some iterations in the beginning, because I know every good refinement step helps me to deliver a better product or better analytics experience later on. And the better I can do this, or the more I can do this, or to have, let's say, a partner in brainstorming to do this, the better usually the results get. And so far, I'm not testing this always like in all the videos. It's really interesting. I can tell you today, we really got to something which was really an interesting take, that the model, let's say the model suggested something that was really interesting for me, because I thought about this before, but I haven't used it in this kind of way yet. And so this was an interesting take. You can do the same, so you can buy the book, you can also read, obviously you can read the book, but then you can also use the mini version to create something, and yeah, just experiment with different kind of tracking setups. Creating a good analytics setup, it sounds a little bit stupid, but it takes experiences and takes. And the problem is you cannot do 20 different analytics setups in your company you're working with. What I recommend to people is to take practice with practicing what I'm doing right now. Pick some tools that you see that you like, or so on, and then try to create an analytics setup for it. This is good exercise. This really gives you a good feeling about how you would approach it when you then have to build it for your own product. All right, enough talking. Let's talk about the results. See here, my initial briefing became much more extensive. First of all, because I talk now the briefing in, I don't write it. But second of all, is I really wanted to bring in that we are not just looking on the core. I'm covering the core here. We have core use cases, so creating tasks, creating teams, creating projects. We have an organization. Tasks can be assigned. But then here, I bring in everything that goes beyond that. What I just described. So I wanted to bring in that we actually have goals, which are important, and then also like we have workflows that are important, that are basically sitting as a layer on top of the core product. And I wanted to incorporate this because I want to build an analytics setup around that. And therefore, I prompted a little bit more this time, but it would be the same when I create a briefing to myself. Usually I have some notes when I do extensive research phase with product teams in the beginning to understand where they're heading to. And then I write down, so they say, core notes to myself when I'm starting to design the whole analytics setup. And then these are quite similar, like the notes that I usually write to myself. Now I put it in, and now we can look what we actually get. Let's have a look on the first version, because like I can tell you what I will change about the first version, then I can tell you which kind of version we end up. Again, we are using the double 3-layer framework that I have developed in the book, which is like the first dimension is, so we break down events by customer events, which is the highest level, so we get to this in a second. Then we have product events, and then we have interaction events. And so the core idea behind this is most of our work should focus on the product layer, because the product layer is really, we want to understand how the product use cases, how people achieve success and value in the product use cases. We are not interested in where someone is clicking. If we really want to know where someone is clicking, we put this in the interaction layer. The interaction layer is really just for a generic view on where people are clicking and doing stuff. We are more interested in 2 abstraction layer on top, where we're focusing on what kind of jobs to be done, what kind of use cases are people actually doing in our product, and how successful they are with it. On top of that, we then put the customer layer, which then tells us like, okay, what kind of customer success levels do the customers achieve? How do they progress or evolve throughout our product? And today I can tell you we have some interesting things in there. This is what I said. This is like the model proposed something which I had included 1 or 2 times in other concepts as well, but I never really developed it out like we did it today. This will be interesting. Okay. Let's first, so I always start with the product layer because this is basically the centerpiece. It sits in the middle, so it's the centerpiece. And so the product layer, like all the other layers, I break down, this is the second dimensions, into entities, activities, and properties. Entities are basically the building blocks of the product. They are basically defining how the product looks like. I always make sure that I don't have too many entities. This is the thing where I really want to make sure that we don't overdo it. Be very restricted with entities. And then within the entities, we have the activities, and these activities usually describe the life cycle of this entity. And then we have the properties for an entity that are giving us enough context to really analyze how the performance in this entity looks like. Okay, let's have a look on the different kind of entities that are proposed here. We have organization. I was thinking a little bit about if I would use account or organization, because technical, it's an account. But I like it to not call it an account in this case, because let's go more for the terminology that the business is using. And obviously, when I set up something in Asana, I set up an organization. And especially with the direction, Asana, I think, is going a lot in the enterprise direction. Organization obviously makes more sense. Under it, we have team. And under that, we have project. This all makes sense. If you would start very simple, we would just get rid potentially of organization and team, and maybe then introduce account, and then just have project. But the other layers already make sense because Asana is definitely already beyond that and already went in, let's say, some kind of enterprisey direction. They have principles pretty early on. Even if you're not a big enterprise, you can still work with teams, and you will obviously work with projects. Okay, so then we have a task. This is the centerpiece. Like yesterday, we will be discussing Vim call. The event that you can create on a calendar is the centerpiece. In Superhuman, it was the email. You always have this centerpiece entity that everything is. This is the core of the core. This is the heartbeat. Also, like the email in Superhuman or the event in Vim call or the message in Slack, this is the heartbeat of the whole system. If they are coming in, all is good. If they stop coming in, things get tricky. And this, for example, could also be something where we can build some, let's say, very raw level monitoring around this to really see if the tasks are coming in. We have customers at risk. Okay, and then we introduce the two things that I just mentioned before. Now we have goal and workflow. And obviously, there is like when we start to discuss and think about, okay, how do we treat entities, how we treat workflows, how we treat entities. When is it still a core entity and not? So in the other videos, I said, okay, I have different kind of tests how I treat entities. If I really want to focus on core, I say, if I can take the entity and the product is still usable, we don't really need this entity in a core setup. And obviously, this is something for goal. This is something for workflow. This is also something for team, potentially. It's not really core anymore. But we are looking now at an analytics setup that is one or two steps further. This is also why I wanted to do it. I wanted to show you different kind of angles to it. We are now 1-2 steps further because now the organization, Asana is really let's say in digital terms, an old tool. It's around, I don't know, 10, 15 years? Quite a long time. So it's natural that it extends. But as you can see, we just extended it with 2 extra entities because right now this looks like where they are focusing on. They're focusing on to bring in goals and to really make goals a first-class citizen. First-class citizens, I'm not sure if there's a good definition for it, but this is also like an indicator. If this plays a major role and you build a lot of initiatives around that, they put it on the homepage, then it's important enough to become its own entity, because then people in any kind of reporting, data reporting, analytics reporting, or in the analytics tool, when you want to have more self-service, they will find it there. Then they can see, okay, how many goals have been created? How many of these goals have been connected with the project? They find the right entry point because the topic right now is pretty important. This is why I want to have it as an entity. The same with workflow. And then obviously we have the user under it, which is still important because next to a task, user is the other core thing that you actually need in it. Let's say the simplest tracking setup for a task management tool is user and task. Then potentially comes project because at some point you want to group tasks in different kind of things. But if you really want to do the most basic thing, you can just use user and task. Okay, let's have a quick look on the activities. For organization, we have organization created, totally makes sense. We have organization updated, I would get rid of it. I explained in the other videos along why I don't really like updated. I won't go into here. Check out the other videos if you like to learn more about updated, but don't want to repeat this all the time. Okay, we have organization deleted. Again, we are talking about life cycle. Organization life cycle. There might be other things that are missing right now that could be in the life of an organization, but these are the core things, so we should focus on that. Then we have different kind of properties. I like that the model for the first time proposed a property where we're using clusters. Here we have, let's say, organization size group, 10 to 50 and so on. This is a property type that I use a lot because they are great for analysis. You can then run a breakdown of any kind of data point in your analytics tool, and you can just have a breakdown by organization size group, and you get a reasonable good bar chart that you can work with, because like here we just have, I think, 5 criterias. If you don't do this, you have 200 criterias and the whole bar chart doesn't really make sense anymore. Grouping stuff or creating clusters is something that is really effective. I like it that it for the first time proposed it because it didn't appear before. Okay, then we have team created, team member added. I really like it. I would also add team member removed because I want to have the counter one here as well to really see how team movements are working. Team updated, again, is something that we don't really need, so we get rid of it. Here, what I really like is that we now have the properties, has goals, has workflows, because this can help us later to really understand adoption. We can really see how deep our goals are adopted, let's say from a we set a goal for kind of an organization, then we can really see how they drill down and if like goals have been adopted on team level, on project level. This is really nice to have this, and it's pretty easy to get because it's just two properties. And it's just a true and false property. It's a nice one. It's a simple data model, but you can do really cool stuff with it. Okay, then we have project created, project template applied. Again, interesting, but I think not big enough to be an own activity, because like it can also be just a property under project created if a template has been used or not. I think this is sufficient. It would be a different thing if you can apply templates afterwards and they promote templates a lot. Then potentially you could say, okay, it's an own activity because like it's not really connected to created anymore. But as long as it's connected to created, I would just use it as a property. Okay, then we have project completed and then project goal linked. Big question. Goal, as I said, important thing. I might keep it as an activity since goals are so important for us and we really want to make sure that they're incorporated. I might keep the activity to just have one activity that everyone in the analytics tool can then find and can work with it. But still, it will be a question mark thing. Maybe yes, maybe no, because you could also handle it with properties. Okay, here, for example, we already have project template source. This totally makes sense. Privacy setting, goal count, workflow count, again, really good, because now also like we can see on project level. Here we are moving away from Boolean, where we just say, okay, has goals. We even go for count, because count incorporates the Boolean value. So because if it's 0, it's false, and if it's more than 0, it's true. But it gives you a little bit more information. So you can also see how intensive it is used. Let's say I would use the same approach also like for the team one. Then we have the tasks. Okay, task can be created, task assigned, that makes sense, task completed, task commented. Potentially task shared. I don't know how big a thing that is. Maybe not, because in the end you assign someone. No, I think it doesn't make sense. Task lifecycle looks really good. Then here for the properties, again, important. Always ID, but as you could see, we always had an ID for everything. We have task status. One thing, we have here task and workflow. I think this is not really precise enough. I would more say task created by and then user or workflow, because this would be interesting, because there I could really see, I could create then analysis about, okay, how many tasks in this project or in this team are actually created by a workflow and how many are created by users. Because this could be really like a good indication for example, develop an automation score for this organization, for a project, for a team, that can also then potentially be even communicated to the user. For example, they can say, hey, your automation score for this project is 5 or 5% or whatever. Do you want to have some tips to increase it? This could be a really good, interesting connection between data and product, where you could really see and you want to drive the adoption of this feature. Because I can tell you from my own experience, this creating tasks automatically is a huge win on saving time, but what is often missed, improving qualities and standards. Because you define one time in one central place how this task should look like. This is like where I spend a lot of time is. So I make sure that the description is good, that the provided assets are really good, if it's a repetitive task that always comes up at some point. And you can revisit it and can improve it over time. When you, for example, run this workflow one time, or you go through the whole process one time, you figure out, we should have a link to this kind of documentation. You just update the task template, and the next time the task has been created, it has the better version already. And so this can improve quality a lot. I like the idea to have the possibility here to connect the analytical insight and then bring it into the product as well. Okay, goal can be created, updated, completed. Again, goal updated might be, I would keep goal updated as a activity here for the only time, just because I'm curious to learn how often do people update their goals. I have no idea if this has any kind of analytical purpose, if this provides any kind of analytical value, but I want to keep it in because I just want to see if we can do something. Maybe I will not define it. Let's say, maybe I say, okay, we don't have to track so many properties with it, but I just want to keep it in to see if it creates some signals or if it's just noise. I don't know. But this is also fine. Sometimes you can just talk to the developers. They say, yeah, it's fine. It's just another event. If they say it's fine, you can just visit it and you can still remove it later on. But you can remove stuff. Always remember, when you track something, you can also remove it if it's not useful. So not always stacking up, also reducing. Okay, workflow activity, workflow created, workflow applied, workflow automated. I would remove the automated one because this is aiming for the AI, which makes sense, but I would put it in a property. I would put it in a property for created and applied. One thing that is missing here for me is workflow run or workflow step run. Because this is interesting. This gives me the heartbeat of the workflows. And I can really see if, let's say, for an organization, the kind of step that's been running, let's say in comparison or in relation, for example, to all the tasks, is increasing or not. This again gives me a good signal back how automation has been adopted. So I would love to have an activity like this. Okay, now we come to the custom activities, which, as I already said before, are really interesting, really cool here. We have the one that we always use. We have first value experience. I think the definition definitely needs some revisit. First task completed, yeah, but it's just one task. Maybe I would do 5 tasks completed. First project completed is too big, doesn't really make sense. It could also be like I invited already like someone to my team or to my project. This I would also say is maybe a better first value experience because I thought it's in such a good shape that I would invite people to it. I made already a decision that we will use it to some degree. But now we come to interesting things. We have workflow value achieved. This is really interesting because we are now looking at customer progress levels that connected to our product strategy and that have different paths of progress and evolution. And you will see it now here. We really look into, did we get this organization to understand workflow value? And we can even take it further. We can have workflow value achieved, and we can have then the repetition and the retention of the workflow value. We can monitor this now. We basically go one step down. Usually, like when I do this, I do it on a higher level to really say, okay, the organization is an active organization or is a pro organization, where I just bubble everything up and say, okay, when they do all this different kind of stuff, I say, okay, they are definitely active, they are good, cool. Now we break it down one level. We look at it from the different kind of strategies that we run in our product. We think that workflow is essential. Therefore, we can see how many organizations have achieved, let's say, workflow level 1 and then workflow level 2, which is like continuously using, creating, adapting workflows, which gives us a signal that this organization has achieved workflow proficiency, and then we can connect it to our subscription and like to see, for example, if subscription has been growing with that. And the same with goal. So we can see, have companies adopted goals? Have companies went into team collaboration? And this is super interesting if you include something like this, because then you can make the connection between analytics, product, and sales. Then you can have an immediate audience that is bubbling up into any kind of sales tool that can provide early indicators to the sales team and say, we have this organization, they are ready for you. You can start to talk with them. We see from the activity what they are basically adding and so on. They are on the path that you can talk with them and you can get them on the enterprise plan. This makes it really interesting. Okay, final thing, interaction layer, all the typical stuff. I would just start with element clicked here. I will not do view changed, form submitted, menu accessed, because element clicked would give me all this too. So here I would keep it simple. We don't really, some keyword shortcuts work in us. Maybe I would also add something about keyword shortcuts. Okay, so this is the tracking plan. I created another version with this. I will not go into total details, as you can see here. So now we have an adapted version with all the feedback that I put in. And then I did 2 final steps already, which I also do often in a project. And I just want to show you because I haven't showed it yet in the other videos because I usually did it later. What I then do is I prepare a Miro board. As you can see here, for example, here we have the schema, or in the end, the event design for the goal entity. We have the goal entity. So you can see here, we have some descriptions. Then we have the different kind of activities like this. And again, like you can already add even more information to this, and we have the different kind of properties. And the other thing, what I often do is like for the developers, it depends a little bit on the setup that you have. For example, if development is working with some kind of event data validation, so I can then also create some JSON schemas that can then help them to put this into any kind of event data pipeline and run a validation on top of that to either to either support monitoring, to say, okay, we have some events that don't really look good, we still push them in, but maybe we should check that. But you could also use it in a very, let's say, in the advanced mode, where you don't let in events that don't match the schema. So this is something for a separate video, or let's say a standalone video, to talk about event data validation, but just that you can get an idea. Again, you can check out the links in the description. There you find the blog post that will go much more into detail what I was discussing here in the video. It extends on the topic that we were discussing here. Then in the blog post, you can also find the link to the repository. You can find the link to the Miro board with all the tracking plans for all the different kind of tools that I'm doing in this series. And I think that's all. If you like the video, if you want to see more of this, make sure you subscribe, and see you in the next video.